The goal of this video is to make agile management intuitive. And therefore, coming back on one of my statements in previous video, saying that the scaled agile methods at the moment are costly and inefficient. So to do that, we first need to very clearly understand why do we use Agile. Agile is a consequence within software development of a new environment that required adaptation to the methods. So development methods that existed were mostly based on concrete product development. I mean, physical products. And this whole digital world, digital virtual world, kind of made things the game different. So, in essence, what Agile was addressing is what we know as a wicked problem. A wicked problem is known for the fact that you only fully understand the problem when you have the solution. So it is about the experience itself is inherently creating some information you don't have at forehand. So to make that concrete, think about you want people, you go and enjoy swimming. So you build a swimming pool, and then people jump in the water and they say, this water is too cold. That's not what we wanted. Okay, so then you need to start installing systems to heat the water. And then while you're heating the water, you get into the problem that the water makes people sick. So you need to start installing filter systems to manage all that. So what you see is that this is kind of happening in many phases, but when you're developing like a pool, it takes a long time before you install it. And so the whole physical world makes it that it takes long before you actually get into these problems. While if you go to software development, the moment you implement, you run, you get in problems. And so that cycle of getting into the problems is like one of the first things you see. It's this hidden deadlocks. It's people say, yeah, we can program that, we're going to implement that. And then they start doing that. And then they start noticing all these possible problems that they need to solve to actually get the thing the user wants. So that's one of the very first things. It's an amplification of all those hidden deadlocks. Another thing is that we are dealing with something we've never dealt before. The digital world is this virtual world. We don't fully understand the capabilities that are at play over there. So what happens is these emerging consequences, and these emerging consequences can be positive and negative. It can be that it leads to spillover effect, so you actually get more than you wanted, but it also can lead to large dangers. And to give an example about this, think about when we were building the combustion engine. We didn't expect it would eventually be so broadly used in the whole world that it would have an effect on the global temperature. That's totally an emerging consequence that we're dealing today with climate change. But it wasn't something the engineers, could even imagine at the moment the combustion engine was being created. Well, if you look today, if you start creating some software, sometimes you can just run it onto the internet, million things, and this emerging consequences just pop up straight in your head, in your face. It's the speed that this all transformation is creating that is the biggest part of the wicked problem. So we have hidden deadlocks, emerging consequences. A third one is that because we don't really know the environment we are going into, the landscape changes. And to think about it, just think about when you walk up a hill, you think, oh, there is the biggest mountain. I'm gonna go over there, and then I see everything. And the moment that you are at that horizon, you suddenly notice like, oh, but there's a bigger mountain there, and you still kind of so it's hidden behind the horizon, but as soon as you go through that point, you understand that there are other horizons. horizon. So this changing landscape is also at a huge speed when you go to software development. The last, but and definitely not the least part is the thing is that you give someone a taste of something they never tasted before, and you may think that that's the thing they wanted, but as soon as they taste, they may change their mind. And I really love the case with IBM did with understanding how people were going to interact with their mainframes. So at that time, the idea that everyone was going to start typing was not really considered a concrete option. First, not everyone was capable of doing this typing stuff, so they thought actually that speak technology would actually be the interface to your computers, to the mainframes, and they tested it. The way they tested it is they put head-ons and speakers, and a person would speak into it, but then in the room next to it there would be someone just listening to it and typing it. So they kind of it's an example of what they call prototyping. It's not prototyping because then you have a technology, but prototyping is you try to understand how people react with the technology if it would exist. And they discovered that like that's not at all how people want to work with their mainframes. So it's a very nice example of how you see that once you can actually give them a taste, the client can re-evaluate. So all those aspects together, this complex adaptive environment where software engineering have to deal with, led to the changing the old methods of doing development into these agile methods of development. So that's why agile is about wicked problems. Now, it's all very well if you think about it from a software engineering point of view, but you need to start thinking of how do we apply this to business, because if you want to do that for management, how do you change the agile, and do we need it? And I think today, with an environment where there's a lot of innovation coming up all the time, where there's a lot of customer involvement in the delivery, where your talent needs a certain amount of supervision, we are actually at a point where the need for a complex adaptive management method is relevant. So what I want to do is, first of all, look at the different aspects we have for the wicked problems. So it's hidden emerging consequence, a changing landscape, a re-evaluating the request. And now the next thing I'm going to do is look at how this relates to development and how this is different to management. Okay. So the first thing we need to notice is that with development we are coding software, so product, while with management we are coding a project. And coding a project, that's going to be way more related to people. Now, what has then changed with before and now? So today we require end-to-end management. We require to bothly deal with soft skills and hard skills. And what you see is that in all organizations today, these are silos. Like the development of the people you are working with, that's part of pushed to human resources. While probably you're like in one of the small parts, and the whole concept of end to end, well, that's pushed up to higher management. You don't touch the whole of the complex adaptive environments, and that's the real big change that is happening. And so here's my very first remark to the scaled agile frameworks. When I look at the frameworks, I see still the disconnect between things like the human resources and the actual product development. So that there's like those are one of the many aspects. So what I suggest is just take a step back. First, try to really understand what does it mean to be agile as management, and then see how we start using and learning what we can from the agile software development. So I made these two comparisons. First, the hidden deadlock. So if you look at software development, there we are dealing with system deadlock. So what does that mean? It means like, okay, you start trying to implement the software, and then you start noticing like, okay, you thought it was easy done on the hardware level, but it turns out it's not that easy done on the hardware level. Or it turns out that some of the code depends on some other dependencies you didn't encounter. So it's a system deadlock. Now, if you go to the management part, it's always human deadlock, in the sense that it's your team is developing the project. That's one thing, but there are also the customers. That's also the human part. So there's a very large part of the human aspect that is the deadlock now. And so how do you deal with that in a complex adaptive way? I mean, maybe you hired someone, and after a while, that's not the place they want to be anymore. So what they used to do is push this to human resources, but now it's, so how you can cope with all this stuff? The emerging properties. If you look at software development, you see that it is a runtime consequence. And a very concrete example I think about is this was this small company called 4Kitchen, who was specialized in building websites where many people would suddenly come and click on a page. And until so the time everyone was busy trying just to make good interface and make good user experience of the website, but they didn't yet take into account the idea that you can have peak performance. So it is with very specific problems like this that you start focusing into these runtime consequences and start dealing with these emergent properties. Now, if you go and think about this, what is this new kind of agile runtime consequence happening at management perspective? It is that today many of the companies are just still built on they are in a certain market that they do know, and tomorrow that's going to be the same. But with all this innovation coming up, and it's both a danger and an opportunity. The danger is that there can be some kind of new technology making everything that was your competitive advantage obsolete. That's a problem, right? That's very often what the big companies are dealing with, because they didn't proactively try to exploit the opportunity. So what is the opportunity? The opportunity is that this market is changing rapidly. So maybe your market today is not your market tomorrow. And I really think about like today and tomorrow. One of the examples I always like is that in the 90s, that's already a while ago, suddenly the whole internet development led to the opening of the broadband technologies. So that means like breaking up roads to build the cables and stuff. So and there's a case in England where it is in London specifically where it was very hard to actually start opening a street. You cannot just do that in that easily. And the London Underground became a player into the telecom industry, because they already had all the tunnels of London. So they just realized, like, we've got all the tunnels, we don't know how to deal with fibers, but that's okay, we can learn how to deal with fibers. So and they figured out that it's actually easier for them, because they already had all the infrastructure to learn about dealing with fibers, than it is for the fiber companies to start getting access to the underground. So you see that kind of agile thinking at executive management. It's not yet very present, because today it's still a lot about you have expertise in a certain domain. You don't think about the energy market suddenly going to the financial market, or be careful over there. I see financial market going into the energy market. That's going to be an interesting case. So all this, that's the market consequences as an emerging property. That's one aspect. Now, okay, back to the development. If you think about the changing landscape, you see that when a developer is actually creating a new software, there's going to be some kind of way to interact with it. That's the interface. So you get this concept of user experience. And I've done a lot of software development myself. Once you kind of start playing with that interface, you can like, that's not exactly what you want. And if you then start actually doing user experience tests, so you get actually people who will going to use it, you will learn a lot about how that changed the way you should implement, well, how the software. And that's very different, for example, to the re-evaluating. So I'm staying a little bit with the development now. If you think about the re-evaluating, that's what the customers will do. So that's the customer experience entering the development world. So I'm not yet talking about the user interface as the things you want to click and feel. That's the user experience. But the fact that once you have, or maybe not need that, but at the moment for you already have it. But the customer may actually change while you're trying to develop the code. So the customer experience is what we'll re-evaluate, while the changing landscape is what you get with the user experience. So I like that difference between user experience and customer experience, specifically if you move over to the management part, because there you see that the changing landscape is about the customer experience. It's about the customer interacting with the company and understanding like, yeah, well, that's maybe not how we wanted it. So that's very comparable to the user experience at the development side, right? That's why user experience at the development side stands at the same level as a customer experience at the management side. So the re-evaluating at the management side, that happens, but what in the classical organization is called a steerco, a steering committee. But if you go to the more self-organizing, reinventing organizational structures like in sociocracy, you see that they talk about consent circles. So those are circles of all the stakeholders involved that will actually make decisions. So the agile way of doing that is actually creating those consent circles. So it is happening at the moment. So all of these aspects are happening because the customer experience landscape, that's a lot to do with end-to-end management. You've got consent circles, the innovation, that's all about the market consequences. And the thing I see probably most lacking at the moment is still the divide between human resources and actually the concepts like change on the workflow. I mean, if you go to educational settings, you have concepts like blended learning and learning on the work floor and lifelong learning. But if I actually go to concrete implementations within companies, that clearly silos. So there's a lot of difference between what I see with the scaled agile frameworks. Now, if I look at those things like human deadlocks, market consequence, then I map it to the SAFe framework, the LESS framework, or the Spotify model. Sorry, but for me, those are like two very different things. And that's one of the aspects that needs a lot more understanding of how can we then do this agile management if we start from a very intuitive point. Okay, so I'll wrap up over here, and with the next presentation, I'm actually going to a bit deeper on how we can do that and link it to the project. Blah, blah, blah. Well, that's for next time. I hope you enjoyed, and okay, I'll see you hopefully.